The chandelier light in the Wu ancestral ballroom didn't just illuminate the room. It refracted off 1,000 surfaces of curated perfection. To the outside world, this 50th anniversary gala was a display of unbreakable dynastic power. To the bankers sweating in the corners, it was a funeral with an open bar. Madame Eleanor Wu stood at the top of the grand staircase, her jade silk qipao stiff enough to serve as armor. She scanned the crowd, her gaze landing on her son, Liam. He looked every bit the crown prince, but she could see the hollow exhaustion in his eyes. They were 3 weeks away from a total liquidity collapse, unless the ghost investor, the shadow entity that had been buying their distressed debt, showed up tonight to negotiate. The Wu Empire would end in a whimper of foreclosure. "Smile, Liam," she hissed as he approached. "Desperation has a scent. Don't let them catch it." "The investor hasn't checked in at the gate," Liam whispered, his voice tight. "Mother, if they don't show, the bankruptcy filing goes public at midnight." The heavy oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The air in the room didn't just change, it stilled. A woman walked in, flanked by 2 assistants who moved with the clinical precision of Secret Service agents. She wore a sculptural gown of midnight velvet that seemed to swallow the light. Her skin, a rich, deep mahogany, glowed against a collar of architectural gold. She wasn't just a guest, she was an event. "Who was that?" Eleanor demanded, her fan snapping shut. "I didn't authorize a black woman on the VIP list. Is she press?" "That's her," Liam breathed, his face drained of all color. "That's the CEO of Ashton Holdings." Catherine Ashton didn't wait for an introduction. She moved through the sea of silk and tuxedos with the slow, rhythmic grace of a predator who already knew where the exits were. As she approached the staircase, the socialites parted like the Red Sea. She stopped at the foot of the stairs, looking up at Eleanor. 10 years had carved away the soft, trembling girl Eleanor had once intimidated in a tea house. This woman was forged in steel. "Madame Wu," Catherine said. Her voice was a low, melodic cello. "You look exactly the same. Time has a way of standing still for those who refuse to move with it." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The face was vaguely familiar. Some girl from the past, a fleeting distraction for her son, but she couldn't place her. "Miss Ashton, I presume. You've been very busy buying up my family's mistakes. I expected someone older." "I grew up fast," Catherine replied. "I found that the world offers incredible returns if you know exactly when to strike." Liam stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Catherine, is it really you?" She didn't look at him. Not yet. To look at him was to acknowledge the hole in her heart that had taken a decade to suture shut. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a matte black business card. "We have much to discuss, Eleanor. About the deed to this house, about the debt, and about the interest on a certain investment you made 10 years ago." She flicked the card onto the silver tray of a passing waiter. Eleanor took the card with a sneer, but as her eyes scanned the back, her hand began to shake. There was no phone number, no address, just a handwritten string of 12 digits, a serial number from a high-denomination banknote. Eleanor's breath hitched. She remembered that number. She had kept the receipt of the wire transfer she had used to pay Catherine to disappear, a bribe to save her son from low-class ruin. "You used that money?" Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in 40 years. Catherine finally looked at Liam, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, bitter and beautiful. "I didn't just use it, Eleanor," Catherine said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "I tripled it. Then I leveraged it. Then I waited. I've spent 10 years building a world where you don't exist, just so I could come back and buy the one where you do." She stepped onto the first stair, invading the matriarch's sacred space. "Check the time, Eleanor. It's nearly midnight. And I believe you're in my house. The silence following Catherine's declaration was more than a lack of sound. It was a vacuum that sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. The elite of the city stood frozen, champagne flutes halfway to their lips, as the ghost investor began her ascent of the stairs. "Liam," Eleanor hissed, her fingers digging into the banister until her knuckles turned white. "Call security. Remove this woman." "On what grounds, Mother?" Liam's voice was a jagged ruin. He was staring at Catherine, his eyes searching her face for the woman he had loved, the woman who used to laugh into his neck and smell like vanilla and old books. But this woman smelled of expensive oud and victory. "She just told you. She owns the deed." "The house is in a family trust," Eleanor shrieked, her composure finally fracturing. "A trust that used the estate as collateral for the 2024 expansion," Catherine said calmly, reaching the top landing. She stood 6 inches taller than the matriarch. "An expansion that failed. Your creditors sold the lien to a shell company 6 months ago. Ashton Holdings bought that company yesterday at 4 p.m. She turned to the room, her voice projecting with the effortless authority of a sovereign. "The party is over. Valet will have your cars brought round immediately. The Wu family is no longer in a position to host." The exodus was frantic. Within 20 minutes, the house, the legendary Wu Manor, was empty of its finery, leaving only the 3 of them in the echoing gold and marble cavern of the foyer. Liam found her an hour later in the library. It was the room where he had once hidden her from his mother's spies, the room where they had whispered about a future that felt like a fairy tale. Catherine was sitting in his father's oversized leather chair, a tablet in her hand, scrolling through a spreadsheet of the family's remaining assets. She didn't look up when he entered. "I expected you to burn it down," Liam said, his voice echoing off the mahogany shelves. "I expected you to come back with a torch, Catherine, not a ledger." She tapped the screen, her expression unreadable. "Fire is emotional, Liam. It's messy. It leaves ash that stains the hands. I prefer a clean acquisition." He walked toward the desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Is that all I am to you now? An acquisition? I searched for you for 3 years. My mother told me you took the money and bought a life in London. She showed me the signed receipts. I thought you chose the exit over me." Finally, Catherine looked up. Her eyes were like dark glass, reflective but impossible to see through. "I was 40 years old, Liam. I wasn't a child. Your mother didn't just offer me money. She offered me a choice between my dignity and your inheritance. She told me if I stayed, she would dismantle your life piece by piece until you hated me for being the cause of your ruin." She stood up, smoothing the invisible wrinkles in her velvet gown. "I chose to build my own inheritance. And as for you, I don't feel enough to be bitter. You are simply the CEO of a company that is currently underperforming. You are a line item." "A line item?" He stepped closer, reaching for her hand, but she moved just out of reach to pick up a crystal decanter of scotch. "Catherine, look at me. I'm the same man." "No," she said, pouring a single finger of amber liquid. She didn't offer him any. "You are the man who believed his mother's lie because it was easier than fighting her. You are the man who stayed in this house while I was building a skyscraper. We aren't even in the same tax bracket anymore, Liam, let alone the same world." The coldness in her tone was sharper than any insult. It was the clinical detachment of a doctor. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice low. "Now, you go to your room and pack a bag for your mother," Catherine said, setting the glass down with a soft clack. "She is to be out fast, or else I'll throw her out myself. As for you, your contract as CEO has a 90-day termination clause. I've decided to keep you on. I need someone who knows where things are buried while I liquidate the remains." "You want me to work for you?" I want you to see what it's like to be at my mercy, she corrected, walking toward the door. She paused at the threshold, not looking back. By the way, I'm planning to move into the master suite. Tell your mother her perfume is still lingering in the drapes. Have the staff burn them. The transition of power didn't happen with a moving truck. It happened with a locksmith. By sunrise, every biometric scanner in Wu Manor had been recalibrated to Catherine Ashton's thumbprint. She didn't move into the master suite yet. That would be too easy. Instead, she took over the sprawling East Guest Wing, a space usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. It was a strategic choice. She wanted the Wus to hear her footsteps above them, a constant rhythmic reminder that their time was a depleting currency. Eleanor Wu spent the morning in the sunroom, her war room, clutching an iPhone like a talisman. I don't care what the papers say, Arthur, Eleanor hissed into the receiver, her voice trembling with a decade's worth of suppressed rage. Catherine Ashton is a vulture. If your bank facilitates her development in the Harbor District, the Wu family will withdraw every cent of our philanthropic support. We will freeze you out of the Botanical Garden Gala. We will... There was a long, excruciating pause. Eleanor's face went from a pale ivory to a splotchy, panicked red. What do you mean? What philanthropic support? She whispered. The voice on the other end was clipped. Eleanor, be realistic. Your accounts have been flagged for 3 months. We aren't worried about you leaving. We're worried about who's taking your place. And frankly, Catherine Ashton just endowed the new wing of the museum. She's not just a developer. She's the primary stakeholder in the city's 2026 infrastructure bond. If I cross her, I'm not just losing a friend. I'm losing my license. The line went dead. Eleanor stared at the phone. For 40 years, her social capital had been a fortress. Now she realized the walls weren't made of stone. They were made of paper, and Catherine was holding the match. Upstairs, the vulture was at work. Catherine sat at a minimalist glass desk she'd had delivered at 6 a.m., replacing the heavy Victorian vanity. She was dressed in a crisp, white silk blouse and tailored trousers, the uniform of a woman who didn't have to prove she was the boss. A sharp knock at the door preceded Liam. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked in, looking like he hadn't slept, holding a stack of legal folders. My mother is calling everyone from the mayor to the bishop, Liam said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked at the room, once a cold, formal space, now buzzing with the energy of Catherine's 2 silent, laptop-wielding assistants. She thinks she can blackball you. She thinks the old guard will protect her. Catherine didn't look up from her monitor. The old guard doesn't exist, Liam. There is only the current guard and the history books. Your mother is currently in the bibliography. She's desperate, Catherine. When she's desperate, she's dangerous. Dangerous to whom? Catherine finally looked at him, her dark eyes sharp and mocking. She can't take my money. She can't take my reputation. I built it in cities where they don't even know the name Wu. All she can do is try to make me uncomfortable in this house. And trust me, after what I survived 10 years ago, a little cold shoulder from a socialite is a luxury. Liam stepped further into the room, his voice dropping an octave. I told her to stop. I told her it's over. But she's convinced you're a fraud. She's convinced that the money came from somewhere. Illicit. Catherine stood up slowly, walking toward him until she was close enough to see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. She reached out, her fingers grazing the lapel of his suit jacket. A gesture that felt like a caress, but ended in a sharp tug that straightened his tie. Tell her to keep digging, Catherine whispered. I want her to see every honest, grueling dollar I earned. I want her to realize that while she was drinking tea and judging lineages, the woman she called nothing was becoming the woman who would decide if she sleeps in a bed or on the street next month. The tension between them was thick, a volatile mix of old ghosts and new power. Liam reached out to touch her arm, his fingers trembling, but a chime on Catherine's desk interrupted them. "That's the mayor's office," one of her assistants said. "They're ready to sign the harbor deed. They want to know if you'll be attending the press conference with the Wu family as your consultants." Catherine smiled, a cold, brilliant flash of white teeth. "Tell them I'll be there. And tell Mrs. Wu to wear her best jade. I want her standing right behind me when I announce that the Wu Foundation is being folded into Ashton Global." She looked back at Liam. 30 days, Liam. The clock is ticking. Are you going to help her pack, or are you going to help me build? The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the East Wing, turning the sprawling gardens of the Wu estate into a blurred gray watercolor. Inside, the atmosphere was even colder. Catherine was digging through the historical archives of the family, not the leather-bound books in the library, but the digital forensic trail of the family trust's expenditures from a decade ago. As a real estate developer, she knew that if you want to find the soul of a person, you look at their bank statements. "Ma'am," her lead assistant Marcus said, sliding a tablet across the glass desk, "we finished the recovery of the deleted server files from the old Wu residence in Hong Kong. We found a series of outgoing wires from 10 years ago. They weren't just to you." Catherine frowned, scrolling. She saw the wire to her own account, the blood money she'd used to start her life. But then she saw the others. Monthly payments to a private investigator. Payments to a specialized document forgery boutique in Macau. And finally, a massive payout to a private clinic in Switzerland. "Why would they pay a Swiss clinic?" Catherine murmured. "It wasn't for medical care," Marcus replied. "It was for a death certificate. Yours." The tablet nearly slipped from Catherine's hand. Her heart, usually a disciplined machine of ambition, gave a violent thud. A few floors below, Liam was conducting his own excavation. He had broken into his mother's private safe, not for jewels, but for the one thing she guarded more fiercely, the legacy folder. He found it tucked behind a velvet box of imperial jade. It was a thick manila envelope, yellowed at the edges. Inside was a single piece of stationery, embossed with the Ashton Holdings logo from 10 years ago, back when it was just a dream Catherine had scribbled on a napkin. It was a letter, written in Catherine's distinct looping cursive. "Liam, I realized I love the money more than the man. Your mother was right. I don't fit here. Don't look for me. I'm moving on to someone who can give me the world today, not a promise of it tomorrow." Liam's hands shook so violently the paper rattled. He remembered the day his mother had handed him this. He remembered the 3 months he spent in a drunken, suicidal stupor in London, and the eventual call from his mother saying Catherine's car had been found in a ravine in the Alps. Nobody, only confirmed dental records from that Swiss clinic. "You're late for the board meeting, Liam." He spun around. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her eyes sharp and predatory. She saw the letter in his hand and didn't blink. "You shouldn't be in here," she said coolly. "You told me she was dead." Liam's voice was a low, guttural growl. "You gave me a grave to cry over, Mother. I spent 10 years mourning a woman who was actually outgrowing us." "I gave you a future," Eleanor snapped, stepping into the room. "Look at her now. She's a shark. She would have eaten you alive back then. I did what was necessary to preserve the Wu bloodline. By forging her handwriting." He held up the letter. "By paying a clinic to lie? You didn't preserve the family, Mother. You murdered the only part of me that was honest." The heavy doors of the study swung open. Catherine stood there, silhouetted by the lightning outside. She looked from the letter in Liam's hand to the panicked yet defiant face of Eleanor Wu. "I wondered why you never came," Catherine said. Her voice wasn't cold anymore. It was hollow. "I sat in that tiny apartment in London for 6 months, Liam. I left the door unlocked. I thought, surely if he loves me, he'll realize the money wasn't enough to make me leave. He'll come and find me." Liam took a step toward her, the forged letter falling to the floor like a dead leaf. I went to Switzerland, Catherine. I went to the ravine. I stood there for a week. I thought I was talking to your ghost. The silence that followed was agonizing. The 10-year gap wasn't just a distance of wealth or geography. It was a canyon built of Eleanor's lies. Catherine looked at Eleanor. The matriarch stood her ground, her chin tilted up, refusing to repent. The price of a secret is always higher than the person who tells it thinks it will be, Catherine said softly. She turned her gaze to Liam. For a split second, the CEO mask slipped, and he saw the 40-year-old woman who had once been his entire world. Now I know why you stayed, she whispered. But it doesn't change the fact that you're still in this house, and she is still controlling you. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. Catherine, wait! Liam shouted. She didn't stop. The board meeting is in 10 minutes, Mr. Wu. I suggest you decide which version of the truth you're going to represent. The scent of expensive lilies was suffocating. Eleanor Wu had spent the last 48 hours and a small fortune on the reconciliation dinner. To the high society of the city, this was a masterful stroke of PR, a way to frame the aggressive takeover by Ashton Holdings as a strategic partnership between two noble families. She is a guest, Eleanor reminded herself in the mirror, adjusting a diamond brooch that represented the last of her liquid assets. A guest in my home, a guest at my table. The ballroom was filled with the clinking of baccarat crystal and the hushed tones of the city's power brokers. The judges, the developers, and the old money heirs who took their cues from the Woos. Liam stood near the bar, nursing a scotch, his eyes fixed on the entrance. He looked like a man waiting for a storm he knew he couldn't survive. When Catherine arrived, she didn't wear the expected guest colors. While the other women were draped in pastels and soft silks, Catherine wore a structured bone-white suit that made her look like a marble pillar amidst a sea of chiffon. "Catherine, dear!" Eleanor called out, her voice projecting to ensure every ear in the room was tuned in. She glided forward, her arms open as if to embrace a long-lost daughter. "So wonderful of you to join us in our family home. We were just telling the governor how delighted we are to have you staying with us during this transition." Catherine didn't move into the embrace. She stepped back just enough to make Eleanor's arms look empty and ridiculous. "The hospitality is noted, Eleanor," Catherine said, her voice carrying a terrifyingly calm resonance. The dinner was served. At the head of the table sat Eleanor, with Catherine to her right and Liam to her left. For 40 minutes, Eleanor performed a monologue of graciousness, spinning a narrative of how the Wu legacy was simply evolving and how Catherine was a protege they were proud to welcome back. "It's truly a testament to the family's strength," the mayor remarked, nodding toward Eleanor, "that you could welcome Miss Ashton so warmly into your home." Catherine set her fork down. The sound of silver hitting porcelain was like a gunshot. "I think there's been a slight misunderstanding of the vocabulary being used tonight," Catherine said, standing up. Eleanor's smile faltered. "Catherine, dear, perhaps after the dessert." "No, I think now is the time for clarity," Catherine interrupted. She didn't look at Eleanor. She looked at the governor, the mayor, and the bank presidents. "Eleanor keeps using the word home, and she keeps calling me a guest. It's a lovely sentiment, but in the world of real estate, we prefer more accurate terms." She reached into the pocket of her blazer and pulled out a single notarized document, laying it flat on the table next to the centerpiece. "As of midnight yesterday, the Wu estate ceased to be a family trust property," Catherine announced. "I didn't invest in it. I purchased it, outright, from the basement to the rafters." A gasp rippled through the table. Eleanor's face went a ghostly, translucent gray. "The only reason Eleanor and Liam are still in this room," Catherine continued, her gaze finally dropping to the matriarch, "is because I have granted them a temporary 30-day discretionary residency. In short, I am the landlord. And the Woos, well, they are generously staying as my guests. I thought it was important for you all to know who to call when the roof needs fixing, or when the bills need paying." The silence was absolute. The power in the room shifted so violently it was almost physical. The governor, who had been laughing at Eleanor's jokes moments before, suddenly shifted his chair 3 inches toward Catherine. "Catherine, you can't do this here," Liam whispered, his face burning with a mix of shame and awe. "I'm not doing anything, Liam. I'm simply correcting the record," Catherine replied. She looked at the stunned socialites. "Please, enjoy the Wagyu. It's excellent. I should know. I paid the caterer's invoice this morning." Eleanor tried to stand, her hand reaching for her wine glass, but her fingers shook so much the red liquid splashed onto the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. You are a monster!" Eleanor breathed. "No, Eleanor." Catherine leaned in, her voice a private silk ribbon of steel. "I'm the person you paid to go away. I just finally realized what I was worth, and it turns out I'm worth everything you have." Catherine picked up her glass, toasted the room, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The matriarch was still sitting at the head of the table, but everyone in the room knew she was already a ghost. The aftermath of the dinner was a silent earthquake. By 2 a.m., the last of the stunned socialites had fled, leaving the Wu Manor echoing with the hollow sound of a fallen dynasty. Catherine was in the study, her white blazer tossed over a chair, her sleeves rolled up. The crisis hadn't waited for the morning. A whistleblower from within the Wu's crumbling firm had leaked a distorted version of the takeover to the press, alleging that Catherine had used insider information to trigger the family's bankruptcy. If the story broke at dawn, the SEC would freeze her assets, and the noble return would turn into a federal investigation. "The leak is coming from the server in the basement," a voice said from the shadows. Catherine didn't flinch. She knew Liam's footstep. He was disheveled, his tie gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "My mother's IT head is still loyal to her. He's dumping the black books, the offshore accounts she used to hide her personal spending. He's making it look like you authorized the transfers during the acquisition." "She's willing to burn her own house down just to see me catch a spark," Catherine muttered, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I can't block the upload from here. I need physical access to the terminal." "The basement vault is keyed to my father's old override," Liam said, stepping into the light. "I'm the only one who can get you in without triggering the alarm." They spent the next 4 hours in the belly of the house. The server room was a cold, humming labyrinth of blue lights and whirring fans. It was a stark contrast to the opulence above, the literal, digital skeleton of the Wu Empire. To save the company, they had to be a team again. "Hand me the bypass drive," Catherine commanded. Liam reached over her shoulder, his chest inches from her back. As he plugged the drive into the main terminal, their hands brushed. It was a small contact, but in the sterile, freezing air of the vault, it felt like an electric current. For a moment, the rhythm of their breathing synced. It was a ghost of a memory. 2 people against the world, working late nights a decade ago when they had nothing but a shared dream and a cheap apartment. "There," Liam whispered, his voice vibrating near her ear. "The upload is killed. We're scrubbing the metadata now." Catherine didn't move. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the familiar scent of sandalwood and stress. Liam turned her chair around, forcing her to look at him. The blue light of the servers made the tears in his eyes look like diamonds. "Catherine," he breathed, his hand hovering near her cheek, not quite touching. "When we were down here, it felt like us again. I know you're in there. I know the woman who used to stay up with me until 3 a.m. just to talk about the future." He leaned in, the gravity of 10 years of longing pulling him toward her. "I never stopped, you know. I never stopped wanting it to be you. Catherine let him get close enough to feel his heartbeat. And then she stood up, her movement sharp and clinical. She stepped around the server rack, putting a wall of cold steel between them. Don't, she said. The word wasn't a scream, it was a blade. I'm not a monster, Catherine. I made a mistake. I believed a lie. Catherine turned back to him, her face a mask of iron. You talk about us as if we were a tragedy written by fate. But fate didn't write that death certificate, Liam. Silence did. You spent a decade in this house, eating off silver plates, while I was scrubbing floors in another continent, trying to turn your mother's insult into a life. I thought you were dead. And you stayed in the same house with the person who told you I was, she countered, her voice finally rising. You didn't look for me. Not really. You didn't hire your own investigators. You didn't question the logic. You didn't fly to Switzerland to see the body. You accepted the grief because it was easier than the war. She picked up her tablet, the screen showing the successful deletion of the leak. You didn't look for me, Liam. That was a choice. You chose the comfort of your mourning over the risk of the truth. She walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking on the metal grate. The servers are clear. Go to bed. We have a press conference at 8. As the elevator doors began to slide shut, she added one final devastating note. And Liam, don't mistake my mercy for a second chance. I'm saving the company because I own it, not because I love the man running it. The morning sun didn't rise over Wu Manor, so much as it interrogated it. Eleanor Wu sat in the breakfast nook, her spine as rigid as the silver service she refused to let the maids clear. She had spent the night not in sleep, but in a cold, venomous clarity. If she couldn't own the mountain, she would ensure that whatever Catherine Ashton stood upon was nothing but a pile of radioactive ash. By 9 a.m., the first blow landed. Ma'am, you need to see this, Marcus said, entering the East Wing study without knocking. He placed a physical newspaper and a tablet on Catherine's desk. The headline of the Financial Gazette was a jagged scar. Predatory property. Is Ashton Holdings the new vulture of the East? The article, sourced from an anonymous high-ranking family member, accused Catherine of more than just a takeover. It alleged that Catherine had intentionally manipulated interest rates on the family's distressed debt, using a network of shadow banks to lure the Wus into a trap. It painted her not as a successful developer, but as a financial predator who targeted heritage estates to strip them of their cultural value. She's attacking your license, Marcus whispered. If the ethics board opens an inquiry, the harbor project is dead. No one will partner with a predator. Catherine looked at the article. She didn't flinch. She's not just attacking my license, Marcus. She's trying to devalue the house. Look at the second page. A secondary filing had been made to the Historical Preservation Society. Eleanor had filed an emergency injunction to have the Wu Manor declared a non-transferable cultural landmark. If successful, it would mean Catherine owned a house she could never renovate, sell, or even inhabit without a government supervisor. It would turn her prize into a cage. Catherine found Eleanor in the garden, pruning white roses with a pair of silver shears. The snap of the blades was the only sound in the humid air. The predatory lending angle was a nice touch, Eleanor, Catherine said, her voice cutting through the silence. A bit cliché, but effective for the morning news cycle. Eleanor didn't look up. Snip. A rose head fell to the dirt. A woman like you doesn't build an empire that quickly without cutting corners, Catherine. I simply pointed the spotlight at the cracks. By the time the investigation clears you, if it ever does, you'll be broke. Legal fees and stagnant projects have a way of eating through new money rather quickly. You're willing to ruin your son's remaining shares? You're willing to let the name Wu be dragged through a fraud investigation just to spite me? Eleanor finally looked up. Her eyes were sunken, rimmed with a terrifying, feverish conviction. The name Wu, is already tarnished by your presence in this house. I would rather the estate be a state-run museum than your bedroom. I would rather we both be beggars than see you as a queen." "That's the difference between us," Catherine said, stepping closer, her shadow falling over the matriarch. "You'd rather destroy everything to keep your pride. I'm willing to endure the predator label because I know the truth is on the ledger. You're playing to the court of public opinion. I'm playing to the court of law." "The court of law takes years," Eleanor sneered. "The injunction on this house is permanent as of this afternoon." "Is it?" Catherine pulled a slim file from under her arm. "I did some digging into the 1992 renovation you did on the West Wing, the one where you used unrecorded offshore funds to bypass the very preservation laws you're trying to invoke today." Eleanor's hand faltered. The shears stayed open. "If this house becomes a landmark," Catherine continued, her voice a low, lethal hum, "it will be subject to a full forensic audit by the state. They won't just find my predatory loans. They'll find your 30 years of tax evasion and illegal modifications. You aren't building a cage for me, Eleanor. You're building a prison for yourself." Eleanor's face went a sickly shade of gray. The scorched earth policy had one flaw. She had forgotten that she was standing on the very ground she was trying to burn. "You wouldn't," Eleanor whispered. "It would ruin Liam's inheritance." "Liam's inheritance is already gone," Catherine said, turning to walk away. "I'm the only one trying to save what's left of his future. You're just trying to kill the woman who proved you're a failure." Catherine paused at the garden gate. "The ethics board meeting is tomorrow. I suggest you decide if you want to be a witness for the prosecution or a defendant in a tax fraud case, because I'm not losing this house, Eleanor." The hearing room was a claustrophobic chamber of mahogany and judgment. This wasn't a criminal trial, but in the world of high finance, the ethics committee of the real estate board was more powerful than a jury. They held the power to strip Catherine of her licenses, freeze her developments, and brand her a pariah. At the center of the long table sat Commissioner Vance, a man whose family had played bridge with the Woos for 40 years. "The allegations brought forth by the Woo Family Trust are grave," Vance stated, his eyes lingering on Catherine. "Predatory acquisition, market manipulation, and the exploitation of a legacy firm in distress. Miss Ashton, how do you respond?" Catherine sat at the defense table, her posture a masterclass in stillness. She didn't have a team of 10 lawyers. She had her ledger and her truth. "I respond with data, Commissioner. Every loan was vetted by third-party auditors. The Woos weren't exploited. They were insolvent. I provided an exit. They are simply upset that I'm the one holding the door." "An exit?" a sharp voice rang out. Eleanor Woo sat in the gallery, her face veiled in lace, looking like a grieving widow of her own empire. "You stalked my son. You used a 10-year-old grudge to systematically dismantle our credit. You didn't buy our debt. You manufactured it." The room murmured. Eleanor's performance was perfect, the dignified matriarch being bullied by the nouveau riche. "We have a final witness," Vance announced, his gaze shifting to the back of the room. "The CEO of the Woo Group, Mr. Liam Woo." The air left the room. Catherine felt a cold prickle at the base of her neck. She didn't turn around. She had told Liam he was a line item, but in this moment, he was the only variable she couldn't control. If he testified that she had coerced him or used their past to manipulate his signatures, her career was over. Liam walked to the stand. He looked like a man who had been shredded by the gears of 2 competing worlds. He looked at his mother, whose eyes were pleading, a silent command to protect the bloodline. Then he looked at the back of Catherine's head. "Mr. Woo," Vance began, "did Catherine Ashton use her past relationship with you to gain unfair access to your family's financial vulnerabilities? Did she deceive you into signing over the estate?" The silence stretched into an eternity. Eleanor leaned forward, a triumphant smile ghosting her lips. "No," Liam said. His voice was cracked, but certain. Eleanor's smile vanished. On the contrary, Liam continued, his voice gaining strength, Miss Ashton was the only investor who offered a fair market valuation for our distressed assets. My mother's allegations of predatory behavior are a fabrication. They are an attempt to use this board to settle a personal vendetta. The room erupted. Liam! Eleanor cried out, her voice a shrill, broken bird. Think of your father. Think of who you are. I am thinking of who I am, Mother, Liam said, finally looking her in the eye. For 10 years, I lived in the house you built on lies. I won't let you build a cage for her out of them, too. Catherine Ashton didn't ruin us. We were already ruined. She just had the courage to show us the bill. Mr. Wu, Vance interrupted, stunned, are you stating for the record that the Wu Group's bankruptcy was a result of internal mismanagement and not Miss Ashton's interference? I am, Liam said firmly, and I have the internal memos to prove that my mother was aware of our insolvency 6 months before Miss Ashton even made an offer. The gavel slammed down, but Eleanor didn't hear it. She stood up, her hand clutching her chest, her face turning a terrifying mottled purple. She tried to speak, to curse him, to curse them both. But only a soft, wet gasp escaped her. She collapsed into the velvet chair, her body suddenly small and fragile, the lace of her veil caught in her mouth. Mother! Liam leapt from the stand, but the security and medics were already moving. Catherine stood up slowly. She watched as they wheeled Eleanor Wu out of the room. The woman who had once seemed like an immortal goddess of status, now reduced to a patient on a gurney. Liam stood in the middle of the room, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his betrayal and his honesty crushing him. He looked at Catherine, searching for a sign of victory, a smirk, anything. But Catherine's face was a mask of somber realization. She had won. The house was hers. The reputation was intact. The matriarch was defeated. But as she looked at Liam, she realized the price of his testimony. He hadn't just saved her, he had effectively orphaned himself. The hearing is adjourned, Vance muttered, his voice shaken. No grounds for further inquiry. Catherine walked past Liam. She didn't stop, but her hand brushed his arm. Not a caress, but a steadying touch, the kind a soldier gives another after a brutal skirmish. Go to the hospital, Liam, she whispered. I'll handle the press. The hospital room was a symphony of expensive silence, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical sigh of a ventilator. Eleanor Wu lay in the center of the white linens, stripped of her jade, her silk, and her fury. Without her carefully coiffed hair and the armor of her social standing, she looked like what she was, a 70-year-old woman whose heart had finally buckled under the weight of her own pride. The door clicked open. Catherine Ashton walked in, carrying no flowers and no malice. She stood at the foot of the bed, watching the rise and fall of the woman who had once tried to erase her from existence. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. It took a moment for her to focus, but when she recognized Catherine, a shadow of the old fire sparked in her gaze, a desperate, dying ember of defiance. She reached for the call button, her fingers trembling. Don't exert yourself, Eleanor, Catherine said, her voice a soft, steady anchor in the sterile room. Liam is in the cafeteria. He's exhausted. I told him I'd sit with you for a moment. Eleanor's voice was a parched rasp. Come to finish it? To watch the end? No, Catherine said, pulling a chair to the bedside. She sat down, crossing her legs with the practiced poise of a woman who was no longer in a hurry. I came to offer you a way out, not for your sake, but for Liam's. He's a good man, Eleanor. He spent his whole life trying to be the son you wanted, even when the woman you wanted him to be with was a ghost. Catherine pulled a single document from her bag. It wasn't an eviction notice. This is a trust agreement, Catherine explained, her tone clinical yet oddly gentle. I am deeding 49% of the Wu estate back to a private trust. It will be held in Liam's name, irrevocable and protected from any future creditors. It ensures that he will never be nothing. It ensures the Wu name continues, even if the power has shifted. Eleanor's eyes widened. Why? You won. You have the deed. Because I don't need to destroy you to prove I've won, Catherine replied. She leaned forward, her dark eyes pinning the matriarch to the pillow. You told me 10 years ago that I wasn't noble enough for your family. You thought nobility was about bloodlines and bank codes. But nobility is about knowing when to be moved with mercy instead of a blade. Catherine set the pen on the bedside table. Here is the fair deal, Eleanor. You will sign this. You will formally retire from all board positions. You will move to the family's tea farm in the countryside, away from the city, away from the cameras, and away from Liam's ear. You will live in comfort, but you will never interfere in his life or my business again. You will keep your face in the eyes of society. You will be the matriarch emeritus who stepped down for health reasons. Eleanor stared at the ceiling, a single tear escaping the corner of her eye. It was the ultimate defeat, to be saved by the person she hated most, to be forced to accept a life of quiet irrelevance as a gift from a woman she had called nothing. And if I refuse? Eleanor whispered. Then I liquidate the estate tomorrow, Catherine said, her voice losing its warmth. I turn the manor into a luxury hotel. I fire Liam, and I release the forensic audit of your 1992 tax filings to the Attorney General. You'll spend your recovery in a deposition, not a garden. The silence stretched. The only sound was the beep of the heart monitor, recording the slow, rhythmic surrender of a fallen queen. Slowly, with a hand that shook like a dry leaf, Eleanor reached for the pen. She signed her name, the elegant, traditional characters she had spent a lifetime perfecting. Catherine took the paper, blew on the ink to dry it, and tucked it away. She stood up, smoothing the front of her coat. The car will be ready to take you to the countryside as soon as the doctors clear you, Catherine said. She paused at the door, looking back one last time. Rest well, Eleanor. You fought a long war. It must be exhausting to be so wrong for so long. As Catherine walked out into the hallway, she found Liam leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. What did you do in there? He asked, his voice thick with dread. Catherine walked over and handed him the trust document. He read it, his eyes scanning the 49% figure, the terms of the trust, and his mother's shaky signature. He looked at Catherine, his expression a mix of shock and a profound, aching gratitude. You saved me, Liam breathed. You saved us. I saved the house, Liam, Catherine corrected, though her eyes softened for the first time. What you do with the people inside it, that's up to you. The morning the eviction notice was rescinded, the air in the Wu Manor felt different. It was as if the house itself had been holding its breath for half a century and was finally allowed to exhale. Catherine Ashton did not enter the house as a conqueror on a war horse. She arrived with a fleet of interior designers, art historians, and a crew of specialists who looked more like surgeons than movers. She stood in the center of the grand foyer, her black trench coat draped over her shoulders like a cape, watching the heavy, moth-eaten velvet curtains of the parlor being torn down. The Victorian era is over, Catherine said, her voice echoing off the marble. I want light. I want the sun to actually hit the floors. By noon, the cleansing was in full swing. Eleanor's oppressive influence was being stripped away layer by layer. The dark, heavy mahogany furniture, the kind meant to make a visitor feel small and insignificant, was moved into storage. In its place came low-slung modern pieces in cream and charcoal. The walls, once covered in portraits of stern men who hadn't smiled since the Qing dynasty, were being filled with vibrant, oversized canvases of contemporary Black and Asian art, abstract splashes of color that breathed life into the stale corridors. Liam watched from the balcony, a cup of coffee forgotten in his hand. He saw a crew carrying out the massive, ornate throne chair his mother had used to receive guests. It was being replaced by a sculptural piece of furniture that invited conversation rather than subservience. "You're erasing her," Liam said, his voice coming from behind Catherine as she directed a worker to hang a massive textured tapestry from West Africa in the main hall. "I'm exhaling her, Liam," Catherine corrected without turning. "Your mother used this house as a weapon. Every shadow was designed to remind you of your duty. Every heavy door was meant to keep the world out. I'm opening the windows." She turned to him, and for the first time, she looked like she belonged there, not because she fit the mold, but because she had broken it to fit herself. "This isn't a museum of the past anymore. It's a headquarters for the future. I've moved the Ashton Holdings executive suite into the North Wing. I'm not just living here, I'm building here." The house began to transform into a fusion of her two worlds. The scent of the rooms changed from stale lavender and mothballs to citrus, sandalwood, and the rich, complex aroma of the spices Catherine had grown up with. She replaced the restrictive tea room with a library that featured a global collection of literature. The staff, who had spent decades walking on eggshells, were given new contracts, higher wages, and a simple instruction: stop bowing. "I'm keeping the ancestral shrine," Catherine noted, walking with Liam toward the small, quiet room at the back of the house. "I'm not a barbarian. I respect your history, Liam, but I will not be a prisoner to it. Your ancestors were pioneers and merchants." They moved forward. "Your mother was the only one trying to stand still." Liam looked around the room. The oppressive weight that had lived in his chest since he was a boy, the feeling of being watched by 1,000 years of expectations, was dissipating. He saw a photograph of himself as a child, previously hidden in a dark corner, now moved to a place where the afternoon sun hit it. "It looks alive," he admitted. "A house should be a living thing," Catherine said. She stepped closer to him, her professional mask softening just a fraction. "For 10 years, you lived in a mausoleum. I thought it was time you lived in a home." She reached into her pocket and handed him a new key, a sleek digital fob that replaced the heavy brass ring he had carried for years. "I've set up your own suite in the West Wing. It has its own entrance. You're no longer the crown prince waiting for a throne, Liam. You're an executive at a partner firm. You can come and go as you please." As she walked toward the North Wing to join her board meeting, the sound of her heels on the floor was no longer the sound of a countdown. It was the rhythm of a new heartbeat for the manor. Catherine Ashton was the master of the house, and she wasn't just holding the deed. She was finally holding the light. The new Wu Ashton Manor was no longer a fortress. It was a glass and stone hybrid of Catherine's ambition and Liam's heritage. But for Liam, the most difficult territory to navigate wasn't the redesigned halls. It was the woman sitting at the head of the long, reclaimed wood dining table. Liam didn't use his key that night. Instead, he rang the front bell at 7 p.m., dressed in a casual linen suit, carrying a single vintage book, a first edition of the poetry they had read to each other in the park when they were 20. When the butler opened the door, Liam didn't walk in as the owner. "Is Ms. Ashton receiving guests?" he asked. Catherine appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked down at him, her expression guarded but curious. She hadn't expected the formality. "The dining room is open, Mr. Wu, but the kitchen is closed. I hope you aren't expecting a 5-course apology." "I'm not expecting an apology at all," Liam said, as he ascended the stairs, meeting her halfway. "I'm expecting a first date. My name is Liam. I'm a local businessman with a complicated mother and a very clear vision of my future. I'd like to know if you're free for dinner." Catherine stared at him. The CEO in her wanted to laugh, but the woman in her felt a flutter she had spent a decade suppressing. She gestured toward the terrace, where a simple meal of Thai takeout, their old favorite, was laid out on fine china. "You have 1 hour, Mr. Wu," she said, though the corner of her mouth quirked. "Don't waste it on small talk." They sat under the stars, the city lights shimmering in the distance. For the first 30 minutes, Liam didn't talk about the estate or the company. He asked her about her years in London and Switzerland. He asked her about the first building she ever designed. He listened to her talk about the struggle, the cold nights, and the exhilaration of her first $1 million deal. He treated her not as the woman who had returned to haunt him, but as the stranger he was desperate to know. "Why are you doing this, Liam?" she asked, setting her chopsticks down. "The noble mercy I gave you. That was for the past. You don't owe me this performance." "It's not a performance," Liam said, his voice dropping into a register of brutal honesty. "For 10 years, I was the head of the family. I hated every second of it. I hated the person I had to be to please a woman who didn't care about my happiness. When you walked into that gala, I didn't see a rival. I saw the only person who ever saw me." He leaned across the table, his eyes locked onto hers. "I don't want the throne, Catherine. I don't want to be the master of this house. I want to be the man who earns a seat at your table. I want to be your partner. In the boardroom, yes, but more importantly, in the quiet hours when the world isn't watching." Catherine felt the armor she had worn for 10 years finally begin to crack. "I'm not the same girl, Liam. I'm harder. I'm colder. I don't give second chances easily." "I don't want a second chance at the old life," Liam countered. "I want a first chance at this one. I want to know the woman who built an empire out of an insult. I want to know the woman who had the grace to save her enemy's son." He reached out, his hand open on the table, a silent invitation. Catherine looked at his hand, the hand of the man who hadn't looked for her, but the man who had eventually stood up to a goddess for her. She didn't take it immediately. She looked him in the eye, searching for any trace of his mother's influence. She found only a raw, terrifying sincerity. "It won't be easy," she whispered. "I'm the boss now, Liam, in every sense of the word." "I've had a boss my whole life," Liam smiled, a genuine, boyish flash of the man she used to love. "I think I'm ready for a partner instead." Catherine slowly slid her hand into his. Her skin was warm, and for the first time in a decade, the silence between them wasn't filled with the ghosts of lies. It was filled with the possibility of a new, airtight truth. The lanterns that hung from the ancient ginkgo trees were no longer the stiff, traditional red of the Wu era. They were spheres of frosted glass, casting a soft, lunar glow over a crowd that the manor had never seen in its 100-year history. There were tech entrepreneurs in sneakers, artists with vibrant braids, and international developers speaking a dozen different languages. The old guard was there too, but they were no longer the center of gravity. They were the curious observers of a new sun. Catherine Ashton stood on the terrace, watching the pulse of the party. She wore a gown of molten gold that complemented the deep mahogany of her skin, her hair let loose. She looked like she hadn't just moved into the house. She looked like she had grown out of its very foundation. "A far cry from the 50th anniversary gala," a voice said beside her. Liam stepped into the light. He wasn't wearing the stiff three-piece armor of a Wu heir. He wore a sharp, modern tuxedo without a tie, looking relaxed for the first time in his adult life. He held 2 glasses of champagne, the good stuff, bought with Catherine's first quarterly profits from the Harbor Project. "The 50th was a sad party," Catherine said, taking a glass. "This is a birth." "To the new dynasty," Liam toasted, his eyes lingering on her with a heat that had nothing to do with the summer air. "To the one we built," she corrected. 100 miles away, in the quiet, mist-heavy hills of the countryside, Eleanor Wu sat on a stone bench in her private garden. A tablet lay on her lap, the screen glowing with social media feeds of the Ashton Wu inaugural gala. She zoomed in on a photo. It was a candid shot of Catherine and Liam. They weren't standing in the rigid, hierarchical formation she had drilled into her son. They were standing close, Catherine's hand resting authoritatively, yet affectionately, on Liam's forearm. They looked like equals. They looked like a power that she could never have manufactured with all the jade and face in the world. Eleanor felt a sharp pang of the old bitterness, but as she looked at the vibrant, smiling faces of the guests on the screen, a strange, quiet realization washed over her. The house was finally happy. It was a truth that tasted like ash, but it was a truth nonetheless. She closed the tablet and looked out at the silent rows of tea leaves. She had her face, she had her comfort, and she had her silence. It was exactly what she had once tried to buy for Catherine, and now it was her own gilded cage. Back at the manor, the music shifted to a deep, rhythmic bass that made the crystals in the chandeliers hum. "They're waiting for the speech," Liam whispered. Catherine set her glass down and walked to the edge of the terrace, overlooking the ballroom. The room went silent. The power brokers, the dreamers, and the skeptics all looked up. 10 years ago, Catherine began, her voice amplified by the perfect acoustics of the renovated hall, I was told that this house was a fortress built to keep the wrong people out. I was told that legacy was something you inherited, not something you earned. She looked at Liam, then back to the crowd. But a house is just stone and wood. A legacy is only as strong as the truth it's built on. Today, we don't celebrate the survival of an old name. We celebrate the arrival of a new vision. This house no longer belongs to a ghost. It belongs to the future. The applause didn't just ripple. It roared. As the party resumed, Liam leaned in close to Catherine's ear. "You didn't just take the house, you know." "Oh?" Catherine arched a brow, her eyes sparkling with a rare, genuine warmth. "What else did I take?" "You took the ruins of an ego," Liam said, catching her hand and pulling her toward the dance floor. "And you built something that might actually last." Catherine smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile of a developer, but the radiant, triumphant smile of a woman who had come home on her own terms. She had been chased out a decade ago with nothing but a check and an insult. Tonight, she stood in the heart of the empire she had conquered, dancing in the light of a sun she had commanded to rise. The matriarch's reign was a memory. The Ashton dynasty had begun. 1 year later, the world had stopped calling it the Wu estate. In the architectural digests and the financial columns, it was simply known as the Ashton Sanctuary. The high walls that had once hidden the family's secrets were now covered in climbing jasmine and solar glass panels. The iron gates remained, but they were almost always open, welcoming the scholars of the Ashton Foundation and the elite partners of a global empire. In the master suite, the room Eleanor had guarded like a sanctum, Catherine stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror. She was dressed for a flight to Singapore to close a multi-billion-dollar land reclamation deal. A pair of arms wrapped around her waist from behind. Liam leaned his chin on her shoulder, looking at their reflection. He looked younger than he had at 40. The gray at his temples no longer looked like stress, but like character. "The pilot says we have a 40-minute window," Liam murmured, his hands resting over hers. "But the foundation board just sent over the final designs for the community center in your old neighborhood. They want your sign-off." Catherine leaned back into him, closing her eyes for a brief second of stillness. "Tell them to wait. I'll review it over the Atlantic. How is the retirement report?" Liam chuckled. "The tea farm is thriving. My mother sent a letter. No demands, no threats. She asked for a subscription to Architectural Digest. I think she wants to see what you've done to the north wing." Catherine opened her eyes, catching his gaze in the mirror. "And? Did you send it? I sent her the issue where you're on the cover, Liam admitted with a wink. Under the headline, The Woman Who Bought the Future. Catherine turned in his arms, her expression softening into something far more intimate than her public persona ever allowed. You're getting quite good at this, Liam. The partner role suits you. It's easy when the CEO knows exactly where she's going, he replied. As they walked down the grand staircase together, they passed the portrait that had replaced the dour Wu patriarchs. It wasn't a painting of Catherine alone, nor was it a traditional wedding portrait. It was a massive, vibrant photograph of the skyline Catherine had built, a forest of steel and light, with a small golden plaque at the bottom that read, "To the ones who were told they didn't belong, build your own house." At the front door, the head butler, the same man who had once been forced to spy on them for Eleanor, stood tall. He didn't bow. He simply handed Catherine her briefcase and Liam his coat with a respectful, genuine nod. "Have a safe flight, Miss Ashton." "Mr. Wu," he said. "Thank you, the Zixuan," Catherine said, her voice clear and commanding. As the sleek black car pulled away from the stone portico, Catherine looked back at the house. It was no longer a trophy of revenge. It was a home. She had taken their history, stripped it of its cruelty, and turned it into a foundation. The woman who had been paid to disappear was now the one who determined who stayed. And as the car cleared the gates, Catherine didn't look back again. She was too busy looking at the horizon. The end. Thank you for watching. If you love this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional twists and character-driven plots. And if you're ready for the next story, make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep believing in love that defies all odds.